friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 1st of May of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video we will start with the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where during the previous 24 hours both the Russians and the Ukrainians once again attacked each other with hundreds of drones. We will start with the Russian attack because there were at least two waves of attacks from the Russian side. The first wave of attack took place during the night between the 30th of April and the 1st of May of 2026, and the Ukrainians are saying that during the previous night the Russians used 210 drones to attack the territory of Ukraine. And as for this attack, according to information we have, mainly the Russians were attacking the city of Odessa, and we have a video confirming that the Russians were attacking the settlement significantly using basically hundreds, maybe dozens, maybe even 100 of drones. In this video we can see how a civilian was making a video about the situation in the city, and we can see several explosions that were taking place in different sides of the settlement, which means that the Russians were attacking. The Russians were trying to destroy warehouses, ammo depots, and probably fuel depots of the city of Odessa and of the region. And telling the truth, during the previous nights, we haven't received anything else about the overnight attack. There were explosions on the territory of the city of Nikolaev. The sources stated that the Russians destroyed several substations, and probably that's it. And then there was a very short pause, and somewhere at 9 a.m. the Russians launched the second wave of attack, and later somewhere at 4 p.m. of the 1st of May of 2026, pro-Ukrainian sources stated that during the day attack the Russians used 409 drones between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. and 3 past half. So this attack was a very big one. As you can see, the Russians used more than 400 drones, and summarizing everything, during the previous 24 hours the Russians used 619 drones. And telling the truth, this attack was a very interesting one. We have lots of very interesting details, so I would like to discuss these details with you in details, because we see that the Russians are intensifying the usage of mesh networks. This is a very interesting technology that the Russians are using, and it seems that currently the Ukrainians don't know what to do with this. Let's discuss everything in details, and first let's start what is the mesh technology and how the Russians use it. So this is the first picture that was published this morning around 10 a.m. and we have already discussed these pictures, but once again let's discuss everything in details. So this is a batch of drones that was launched by the Russians somewhere at 9 a.m. and somewhere at 10 a.m. This batch of drone crossed the border with Ukraine and continued moving further in the direction of the central part of Ukraine, in the direction of Cherkasy, the city of Cherkasy. So the most important thing is that the Russians answered and were moving not like a separate cloud of drones, a separate wave, a circle of drones or something like this, but as you can see, the Russian attack looked like a corridor. So it's like a corridor between the central part of Ukraine, the city of Cherkasy, and the border. So just through this corridor, the Russians had more than several hundreds of drones. But the most important thing is that the Russians, once again, didn't use as a big cloud, a big separate cloud, let's say in the central part. No, the Russians were trying to maintain a corridor between the city of Cherkasy and the territory of the Russian Federation, because the Russians have a stable signal on the territory of Russia, and the Russians don't have a stable signal on the territory of Ukraine. So that is why they need something, they need a technology that will allow the Russians to have a stable signal between the territory of Russia and the central part of Ukraine, the city of Cherkasy. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, the mesh network, the mesh technology. So this technology is this following situation. The Russians use hundreds of drones, and every single drone is equipped with a modem, with a special equipment. And this equipment has connections with equipments in this, with similar equipments through these, let's say, through these drones and through this corridor. And all these equipments allow the Russians to have a stable signal between the territory of Russia and the central part of Ukraine. So what is the purpose and what is the reason of using of this technology? Why the Russians think that this situation can improve their massive attacks and can bring them significant results? And the thing is very simple. At the beginning of the special military operation, when the Russians, for example, during another attack across the border between Ukraine and Russia, let's say like this, if when the Russians crossed the border like this, during the first, let's say, waves of attacks in 2022, 2023, and even in 2024, the Ukrainians at the beginning knew for sure where exactly these drones are going to move. So because the drones were attacking just using straight line, and it was always known at the beginning what exactly the Russians were going to attack. But when talking about mesh technologies, the mesh network, the Russians can enter the territory of Ukraine, the Russian drones can enter the territory of Ukraine without specific coordinates. So the Russians can move deep inside of the territory of Ukraine without specific coordinates almost till the central part. So as you can see, there is a corridor, and this corridor persists since 11 a.m. till almost 12 p.m. So the Russians have this corridor, and when the Russians concentrated their biggest number of drones in the central part, in the city of Cherkasy, only at this very moment, the Russians sent final coordinates to these drones. So only during these moments, the Russians gave a job and gave a task to these drones. What to attack, when to attack, and which coordinates. So what does it mean for the Ukrainian side? This means that using mesh technology, the Russians reduce the time the Ukrainians have for maneuvering. Because, for example, if you know the exact coordinates, exact targets that the Russians are planning to attack, let's say in this area when the Russians just cross the border, of course you have enough of time for maneuvering, for evacuation of an enterprise, and for different things, to redeploy additional mobile fire groups and so on, with the purpose to destroy these drones over some objects of critical infrastructure. So when talking about this situation, for example, if the Russians are planning to attack the settlement of Ternopil, the distance is around 600 kilometers, which means that these drones most likely will cross this distance 3 or 4 hours, which means that the Ukrainians have enough of time to prepare themselves around the city of Ternopil. But this is a completely different situation if, for example, first you use drones to concentrate drones somewhere in the area of Cherkasy. So here you concentrate in this region, let's say, hundreds of drones, but still the Ukrainians don't know what exactly are you going to attack. And when you are here, and only when you are here and you receive the final coordinates, of course, then in this particular case, the distance between the area where the Russians receive final coordinates and the settlement of Ternopil is already not 700 kilometers, but just 400 kilometers, which means that the Ukrainians have less time for maneuvering. Furthermore, from this area, and this is not the first time when the Russians before another massive attack first concentrate their drones in the area of Cherkasy, and only then they provide final coordinates what to attack. This is not the first time, and this is the reason why the previous attacks since the beginning of this year from the Russian side shown very big effectiveness from the Russian side. So from these positions, the Russians may attack in many directions. The Russians may go in the direction of the city of Dnipro. The Russians can begin moving in the direction of Vinnytsia region. From these positions, the Russians may attack even the city of Kiev, which means that almost until this area, the Ukrainians are not able to move their air defense forces from any of these positions. And so this is the reason why the Russians are using these mesh technologies in comparison with the Ukrainian side. And this is another important situation. We will discuss this when we will start discussing the Ukrainian massive attack. So as for the previous 24 hours, as you understand, the Russians attacked the western parts of Ukraine. First, the Russians concentrated their drones in the central part of Ukraine, in the area of Cherkasy. When they managed to concentrate a critical mass in this area, the Russians continued moving further in the western direction with several waves, and they began bombing and attacking the city of Ternopil. The Ukrainians didn't have enough of time for maneuvering, so that is why the Russians managed to approach the city of Ternopil without any resistance, and the Russians managed to save significant number of drones. They haven't lost almost anything because the Ukrainians didn't know where exactly the Russians are going to move, so that is why their air defense positions, due to the lack of air defense forces, were limited and weren't there in enough of as a critical mass. So that is why the Russians had the city of Ternopil, and during the day we received lots of updates from this area. The Russians attack the settlement of Ternopil, the Russians attack several warehouses, the Russians attack several buildings, probably ammo depots, fuel depots, but the most important is that several pro-Ukrainian sources stated that the Russians during the previous 24 hours, during these waves of attacks, destroyed one of the most important factory of Ukraine that Ukrainians were using to produce drones. So the drones that Ukrainians used to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, some of them, some models of these drones, the Ukrainians were producing right exactly in this area, and the Russians destroyed this industrial zone completely without any chances to restore this area. Furthermore, we received reports that several drones were attacking in the direction of the city of Zhytomyr, so there several updates were reported from this area, and several explosions were recorded on the territory of the settlement of Rovna. In this video we can see another building that was completely destroyed, and we can see special services that were trying to stabilize the situation, and so on. So once again, these waves of attack, these two waves of attack were the biggest, one of the biggest, and most likely this is not the end. By the time I started making this video, we had reports that the Russians began redeploying their Iskander launching systems, which means that during the upcoming night between the 1st and the 2nd of May, the Russians may once again attack Ukraine, but this time not just with drones, but also with ballistic missiles, maybe even with cruise missiles. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, a bit later, pro-Ukrainian sources published several maps where we can see the approximate routes of attacks. So this is the first map. Once again, the Russians first established a stable mesh connection between the central part of Ukraine and the mainland, and only then, when the Russians concentrated a critical mass, they continued moving further in the western direction. And this is the reason why the Ukrainians basically didn't have enough of time to prepare the cities like Zhytomyr, Rovna, and Ternopil against the Russian drones. And this is the reason why the Russians, during these waves of attacks, managed to destroy everything they were tasked for. And this is a very important situation. Now, from this perspective, we understand that currently the Russians need just one thing: to find an object to attack, and obviously they will be able to attack this object using these mesh networks. Now let's talk about the Ukrainian attack. The Ukrainians use completely different technology. The Ukrainians use satellites. They use the stable internet connection with their drones to attack the territory of Russia and to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. And the very interesting video today was published by pro-Russian sources. And this is the video I'm talking about. In this video, we can see the Ukrainian drone that was intercepted by Russians and was safely landed on the surface of some probably lake or something like this. So here we have several important details. So this is first of all a fighting jet drone of the Armored Forces Ukraine that has explosive on board, and this drone can attack anything and there would be explosion and damage. Furthermore, we have two drones that were attached to this main drone. And these two drones have possibilities to attack some objects as well, and probably they have some grenades or some explosives on board as well. And this is the second thing. And the third thing is that this drone, this one in particular, this drone, has the Starlink terminal on board, which means that this drone, during all its pass from the territory of Ukraine deep inside of the territory of Russia, had stable internet connection. How the Russians managed to jam this drone, I'm not sure, but the most important thing that the Russians managed to do this. And these are three things about these drones. First of all, big drone. The second thing is two drones installed on this drone. And third thing, that's the Ukrainians were using the Starlink internet for stable connection. So which means that the Russians are using mass network, the Ukrainians use the satellite internet. And the question is why the Russians chose the mesh technologies in favor of the satellites. Because you know that during the previous 24 hours, we received another update from the Russian side that for the first time for a very long period of days, so years, the Russians have launched the Soyuz 5 missile. And this is a medium-class missile that can bring satellites to the low orbit. And we see that the Russians most likely are going to continue improving these technologies with the purpose to create this the satellite internet in the end. And they're intensifying their flights. They're launching rockets from Baikonur, from different launching sites and so on. But at the same time, the Russians invest more time and more finance in the mesh technology. And it seems that the Russians think that if something bad happens between not just Ukraine and the Russian Federation, but let's say between the Russian Federation and the European countries and the NATO countries, then we need to understand before possible nuclear strikes between the parties of the conflict, most likely first thing that the Russians would do, they would destroy the satellites of the Western countries on the low orbit. And the Russians believe that if they destroy satellites like satellites that provide stable internet connection, then the entire communication, the entire connections, and most of the systems of the Western countries will collapse automatically. And which will paralyze not just NATO forces, but the forces of the entire global West. And the Russians believe that at this moment, if it happens, they will have a new technology, not so new, but they will have a stable and developed technology of the mesh network. So maybe this is the logic of Russians. They understand that satellites is good, but if something happens, the satellites won't help you and won't save you. But if you have developed mesh technology, then you will be able to get, obtain something like superiority. And this superiority can lead to a total defeat of the Russian opponents.
Da min kone bestilte den her ting online, sagde jeg at det var spild af penge. Siden den ankom, har jeg brugt den hver eneste week.
Let's continue with the Ukrainian attack. As we discussed during the previous days, the Ukrainians 3 times, just during April, the Ukrainians 3 or 4 times attacked the settlement of Tuapse. And today wasn't an exception. The Ukrainians once again attacked the city of Tuapse with drones, and as a result of attack, several tanks were damaged and probably destroyed. This is the video from the city of Tuapse as of the 1st of May of 2026. We can see a big fire, and we see that once again the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage to this area. Several hours after this attack, several pro-Ukrainian sources published some articles about the consequences of the morning attack. And according to information we have, the Tuapse refinery is about to lose its capacities completely. So it seems that if Ukrainians continue attacking the Tuapse refinery, so 2, 3, maybe 4 strikes, and the entire refinery would be completely destroyed. But the most important thing about this attack is not even the attack itself. The most important thing is the reconnaissance operation that took place yesterday. So this is the video that was published by different sources, and the author of this video stated that after the completion of firefighting efforts in Tuapse, an American RQ-4D Phoenix reconnaissance drone with Italian registration appeared in the sky over the Black Sea. The machine is actively working near Sochi and is apparently monitoring the situation in Tuapse. So basically yesterday the Ukrainians probably or NATO countries managed to collect the necessary information, and right after this happened, the Ukrainians attacked the city and dealt significant damage. So this is the main problem, not the problem of attack itself, but the problem is that the Western countries still can carry out reconnaissance operations and the Russians are not able to do anything with this. So this is the most important thing, and now the Russians most likely are trying to find a solution how to fight this situation without hot face or without open attack on these reconnaissance drones, but yet we see the Russians haven't managed to do this. They haven't managed to find a solution. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from the central part of Russia. We had a report that during the previous nights also the Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Chelyabinsk. They attacked the Russian airfield, this one, and the sources reported, mainly pro-Ukrainian sources reported, that the Russian 5th generation aircraft Su-57 either was damaged or maybe even destroyed. As of now, we don't have anything to confirm this, just a satellite picture. Something is happening here, but maybe in coming hours the Ukrainian sources will publish additional details. Furthermore, the fire is still going in the area of Perm, and this is the morning picture, the morning video of the situation in this region. We see that the oil refinery and some objects of energy infrastructure of this city were also almost completely destroyed as a result of the overnight attack that was carried out by the Ukrainians yesterday. We have covered most of the updates regarding massive attacks, but once again, most likely the 619 drones that the Russians have already used since the beginning of the 1st of May of 2026 is not the final number. Most likely in coming nights the Russians will attack Ukraine once again. So everything will be done from the Russian side, probably to force the Ukrainians to attack Russia during the 9th of May. And once again I would like to point your attention that if Ukraine attacked the territory of Russia during the 9th of May holiday, this can lead to completely unpredictable consequences. And the most important is the nature of conflict could be changed immediately. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the Chernigov, about the Kharkiv direction. During the night, the Russians also attacked the city of Kharkiv, and this video was published from this area. And by the way, a very important detail. As for this video, here we can see that the Russians during the night destroyed another gas station. So since the beginning of April, the Russians have already damaged or even destroyed dozens of gas stations through the northern, northeastern and the eastern parts of Ukraine. So we are talking about this territory. The Russians are trying to create the situation when the northeastern, eastern parts of Ukraine will stay without any fuel, without gas stations, which most likely will hit the Ukrainian logistic significantly. So, the Kharkiv direction. During the previous day, additional changes on the ground were recorded. This is the end of the 30th of April, and this is the end of the 1st of May. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, established complete control over the settlement of Pokolyana. The Russians continued their offensive operation along the river of Volcha, and most likely this group of the Northerns will continue offensive operation until the Russians establish complete control over the river of Volcha along the border. But most likely the Russians will not continue offensive operation further in the southern direction, because the gap and the distance between the settlement, let's say, of Pokolyana and the settlement of Bely Kolodets is about 10 kilometers, which automatically becomes a kill zone for anything that enters this gap. So most likely the Russians will continue offensive operation, but most likely the Russians will continue offensive operation along the river of Seversky Donetsk. As you can see, there is a very big forest along the river which protects and hides the Russians from FPV drones, and most likely the Russians from these positions at some moment will turn in the eastern direction and they will continue offensive operation to attack the settlement of Bely Kolodys from behind. So most likely this direction is a primary direction for the armored forces of the Russian Federation. They will try to develop this area like this way. They will try to take these territories under complete control. One group will continue offensive operation further, and the second group will attack the settlement of Bely Kolodys from behind. According to most likely the Russian logic, this will force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area further in the southern direction. So, and this will allow then to the Russians to take under complete control the gap between the border and the Bely Kolodys defense layer. And the battle for the next defense layer will begin. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka and the Konstantinovka direction and the Slaviansk direction as well. As for the Slavians, lots of updates were recorded. The Russians continue attacking the Ukrainian forces in this area, but without changes. The city of Slaviansk, lots of explosions and lots of updates were recorded from the most western part. According to these updates, we see that the Russians have established a certain fire and FPV drone control over the territory, and this is the only corridor for Ukrainians for the logistics. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing different positions through the entire line of combat contact in the Zaporozhye direction, and this is the Ukrainian positions in the area of the city of Liman. So according to this update, the Russians are trying to destroy these buildings, probably before entering this part of Liman from the north, from the settlement of Drobyshevo. But probably these videos and this number of videos are the most important number. Here we can see how Ukrainians were trying to enter the city of Liman from the area of the city of Slaviansk using this and the only logistic line. And in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking vehicles and transport of the armored forces of Ukraine that was trying to enter this territory. So a lot of episodes that confirm that Ukrainians are no longer have a safe road for the logistic purposes in this region. Here we can see another vehicle that was attacked by Russians, a quadra, something like a motorcycle of the armored force or quadricycle that was attacked and destroyed by Russians. And here we have another video also from the same area, how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian units. So this territory is under complete control, which means that the Ukrainians, the contingent on the territory of Liman, currently has huge problems with logistics and supply.
Drømmer du om at få dine penge til at vokse? Få 3 gode grunde til, hvorfor aktiesparekonto kan være noget for dig.
The city of Konstantinovka is under very heavy fire from the Russian side. The Russians search for Ukrainian positions and then the Russians attack them with aviation. The Russians intensify the number of bombs they use from month to month. We are waiting for fresh statistic data on this matter. But the most important thing is that the Russians also began a psychological attack. During the previous day, they dropped several instructions in several areas of the city of Konstantinovka, suggesting and proposing Ukrainians to surrender. It seems that in coming days, maybe after the end of May's holidays, the Russians will begin offensive from the area of Novodmitrievka in the direction of the central part of Konstantinovka. The Russians will try to take under complete control something like this, and if Russians are able to finish this offensive operation and to take this territory of Konstantinovka under complete control, of course, this will lead to a cauldron. The Ukrainians in the southern part, in the western, southwestern parts, would be caught by the Russians in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. Now let's move further. As for the Dobropolye and Dnipropetrovsk directions, the most important updates are coming from the area of Pokrovskaya. The Russians published a video where we can see how they were attacking bridges between the cities of Pokrovskaya and Grishina and Velika Mikhailovka and the mainland. In this video we can see how Russians destroyed this bridge, and during the second part of the video, how the Russians destroyed this bridge. So the Russians are trying to cut this area from supply and support from the city of Zaporozhye. Probably the Russians are planning to intensify their offensive operation in this area. As for the Zaporozhye direction, the most important updates are coming from the western Zaporozhye flank, where according to several pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly in this area, and the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation. We are waiting for new details about the situation in this area, but it seems that the Ukrainians are always counter-attack only where they know the Russians are planning to continue their own major offensive operation, which means that in coming days we most likely will see something in this area. As of now, the Ukrainians are just trying to improve their positions, and most likely before the beginning of the Russian major offensive operation, which most likely begins after the end of May's holidays. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world.